the C-Suite Edge. I'm your host, John Light. I'm also the founder and CEO of Sabretooth Recruiting, and today I'm actually talking to someone who's very interesting and very quick, Eric Kronman, who's joining us today from Fluet Law, where he is a partner in both the government contracting side as well as corporate transactions. Kind of a unique combination. Eric, thanks so much for joining us today.
John, it's a pleasure to be here.
So let me get us started on this by asking you, because I think it's fascinating. You've covered so much territory in your career. You've been in big law, you've been in the VC space, lots of M&A experience, lots of contract experience. Tell us a little bit, maybe a 90-second, 2-minute rundown on your career and the path that has gotten you to where you are today.
Yeah, happy to. So, I've always been attracted to entrepreneurship, to helping run businesses, and ended up in law school and was very attracted to venture capital law, where at an early stage you can start supporting small companies, high growth. A lot of friends going to these huge New York firms are supporting Fortune 500s where they're the 20th attorney on a matter, and here I am interacting directly with CEOs in my first year, doing a lot of venture financings, M&As, exits, things like that. Thanks to the financial crisis, that career got cut short a little bit in being a pure venture capital lawyer in 2009, and I found myself in-house at a GovCon. Thought I was going to ride out the recession, ended up staying for 8-9 years in the world's best job, eventually become a division general counsel of a very large government contractor, then the GC of a couple more GovCons, always with a national security technology focus. And then, found myself back as a law firm partner the last handful of years, where a lot of my clients are drawn both from high tech, doing venture, doing M&A, as well as GC of a satellite company, so doing a lot of aerospace, a lot of satellite, a lot of cyber, national security, and then working a lot with just high growth, high tech, entrepreneur focused companies.
Well, and so much tech that's coming out these days needs a lot of capital fuel. And I would think that space, that intersection where you're sitting, that overlap between these areas it's got to be in fuego. It's got to be on fire in terms of growth and opportunity and what you're seeing come out.
Absolutely. My whole career has been in the DC suburbs, Northern Virginia. And when I started at a firm called Cooley, which is the largest Silicon Valley-based law firm, Reston, Virginia was the outpost. They were it. That was the one East Coast office, and the whole world surrounded
the
Silicon
frontier.
Valley. Today, Cooley's in 20 offices, multiple East Coast offices, and as well as your Texas-based. Austin's very busy in tech. Boston, Broomfield, Denver area, but the centers are still Silicon Valley, and then internationally you'll see a lot in Tel Aviv and now in China. But DC region has become a huge hotbed for technology. Anyone involved in government contracts has known for decades that the world's biggest customer is the United States government. But that used to be shipbuilding, aircrafts, these huge government contractors and integrators, and a lot of it was human services. People performing government functions. If you're working in a 3-letter agency, are you a blue badge or are you a green badge? Whereas a lot of support is actually contractors. But the explosion in the last 10, 15 years, thanks to helping warfighters with autonomous vehicles, so much of the cyber technologies, the interface with AI ML and how it can support other government, especially defense-focused technology needs, the amount of venture capital and also the amount of exits, the M&A or the IPOs, dealing with national security-focused companies has just been tremendous.
So let's talk about that for a second, because in that context, I know you all have dozens, if not hundreds, of problems you could potentially solve for your clients. But when you look at that universe, how would you position yourselves from the perspective of, hey, this is the biggest problem we solve? How do you all approach that?
Yeah, and I'll say we're almost agnostic to the type of client or company it is, or it's a universal truth. Clients seeking great advice from attorneys, they're looking for confidence, protection, someone they can trust, someone that can take their goals and make sure that they can achieve them in the best way possible. Not only, I'll call it the offensive of, how are you going to help me license this or protect this and maximize revenue, but also how are you going to protect the downsides, make sure that I'm compliant, make sure that I'm checking all the boxes.
Right. Yeah, because unnecessary risks or risks you're blind to as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, man, those can be the kiss of death.
And we see it so much with high-tech companies that are new to government contracting, right?
Yeah.
They say, I don't have any government contracts. But you're like, well, actually, you're a vendor or a subcontractor supporting someone else who's supporting the Navy. And because of that, you are a de facto contractor. And now, here's the list of compliance issues you have to worry about. And here's, all the flow down requirements that you have in both your subcontracts, and make sure you're doing your hiring and your employment right. Because, yes, you are now a government contractor.
Man, I tell you, that's always been something that's been bugging me in the back of my mind, because here at Sabretooth, we take a different approach to recruitment, to headhunting, than almost anyone else. We don't run ads. We don't have, people coming in and applying on LinkedIn or through Indeed or anything of that nature. Instead, we take more of a spearfishing approach. We're going to go find you where you are, and we're going to talk to you, actually have a human-to-human conversation. And I was talking with someone the other day, and they're like, well, what do you do about compliance? If you were a company, for example, you're hiring 100 people or 1,000 people, what do you do about compliance? Well, no one's applying, so we're not asking for check boxes. That's really on our client side. So I don't know that we're impacted that you have these compliance issues per se, but I can't help but imagine that when you're dealing with the federal government, any government, but especially the federal government, though, that your T's have to be crossed, your I's have to be dotted. You can't just go out and hire somebody who's really competent. You've got to give kind of a fair chance to out in the marketplace. How do you do that? How do you afford that compliance regime?
Right.
When you're not even a Series A yet, as a way of looking at it.
So one of the nice things that we bring, I gave the super fast forward version of my career, but I've been an entrepreneur. I've had some successful exits as a founder. I've been the GC of multiple, early stage startups as well as late stage startups. A unicorn, ones that have gone public, had exits. But most of the team at Fluet here, we have been in house. We've been an entrepreneur, so it's a balance, right? You do not need the gold plated version because you broke $10,000 on a government subcontract. Instead, you want to at a high level just understand what they are. But if you're pre-Series A, I think every startup has their multiple inflection points, right? They go from a PowerPoint deck idea, they raise some initial startup capital, do a friends and family round or safes or convertible notes. You have the first inflection, are you revenue generating? Or is it just an idea being built? Huge capex to get there. And then the second inflection point is, are you cash flow positive, right? And then obviously the faster you do that and the faster your compound annual growth rate, the more you're worth, and the easier it is to raise money, the more exit opportunities you have. But at different stages, what's the truth when you're, the pre-Series A, as you said? Focus on revenue. Let a lot of the, we're going to help you with what are the lines you cannot cross, but you cannot have a gold-plated system when you should really be focusing on attaining customers and getting to revenue or building revenue and having a revenue grow. So we come with the understanding of there's not a one-size-fits-all or a, you must. It's just balancing, hey, here's the risk. Here's how we're going to help mitigate the risk in a very affordable way. And by the way, as you hit these other milestones and the risk increases, we'll mitigate further and we'll create more systems and processes. But we can very efficiently and quickly give you kind of the starter kit you need, train you on it, make sure you're trained on it to train your people and to make sure you're compliant. And again, it's just making a risk. The same conversation that these CEOs are going to have with their insurance brokers, right? You can't buy and protect everything, but at this stage, let's protect from the worst. Let's get the absolute needs, and then we'll layer more protections on later as you grow.
We got to protect against the catastrophic, I'm sure, but at the same time, when you're leading a small business like that, it's everyday survival mode, right? I got to drive that incremental dollar of revenue into the company. I'm kind of going somewhere with this because and I'm going to give him a plug right here if it's okay. There's an interesting guy, multiple exits. He lives in D.C. He wrote a book. His name is Gus Bessel. He wrote a book called The Startup Lottery. And it's fascinating to me to sit here and listen to your approach to this, having someone who's on the podcast who's gone and done multiple exits as well. We were talking about this merged space, this overlapping space between GovCon and entrepreneurialism and corporate transactions and all those things coming in. And one of the spaces that I think is probably the hungriest outside of capital is talent. It's got to be one of the hardest places to get the right people at the right time doing the right thing. And a big part of that is how you compensate them. And Gus popped to mind in his book, The Startup Lottery, popped to mind because it's specifically written for people joining early stage companies and the pitfalls they may look at and all this. But the reason he came to mind as we've been talking is I know pre-show we were chatting for a minute about, man, how do you protect somebody who's bringing in a capital partner or they're exiting the business, they're selling it, because so many executives, entrepreneurs, but executives as well, haven't been through the process and they don't know the pitfalls that come along. For example, what does your earnout look like? Are you taking on somebody in a preferred position against where you're sitting on the cap table? So I'm really curious to hear in this space that is merging right now in the market between GovCon and let's just say technology, because a lot of people are pouring a lot of money into LLMs, whether it's ChatGPT or it's Gemini or it's open or it's whatever. But the real gold mine, I think, the gold rush, are in these people with great deep domain knowledge who are developing specific applications that are of use, addressing specific problems. You mentioned autonomous vehicles in a military application, for the DoD. That would be one great example, wherein we're building this application to perform this one task, whatever that one task may be. Of course, autonomous vehicles, they got to turn right, they got to turn left, go forward, backward, right. Deliver ordnance and material and whatnot. But there's just so much out there, so I think it'd be of great interest to me. I'm sure great interest to a lot of people. How do you help someone navigate it who's never navigated the GovCon space before, but they're bringing a very useful technology that, from a contract perspective, be it the DoD or DOT or whatever it might be, it'd be very useful to the country.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're going to try to unpiece a few of your questions there at once. So you remind me, you mentioned autonomous vehicles. I've got one client that's doing these in the DoD sector, and another client with a very similar technology set doing this as almost a fireworks replacement, UAVs, doing light shows at sporting events. And I've seen these, but hundreds flying in.
Oh, that'd be really cool. Yeah.
And graphics in the sky. And it was easy to do in the United States, taking that technology, but it turned out a lot of the components in these UAVs is either EAR, dual use technologies that have both a defense application and commercial, or even some components could be a defense article. So all of a sudden doing a show in Germany requires an export license, right? So you actually see these technologies, the overlap between what's developed for DoD sake, overlapping to commercial, and then things developed commercial that have a defense use. But at a higher level, you asked, you were talking about talent and how you motivate people, or a company, how you motivate a company that sells another. You mentioned the words earnouts, and you're talking about incentives for employees. So much of what we always think about are, let's simplify and just think, what are our goals, where are we heading, and then we'll help draft the contracts to make that work. And whenever you think about incentives, you always want to think of, are they objective, are they measurable, and are they attainable, right? So when I know you do placement of executives. So when an executive is looking to move to another company, before he gives his notice of his current company, takes a risk, he wants to know, okay, first of all, it's going to go well. People don't take jobs thinking, what happens when I'm terminated not for cause, or what happens when I'm terminated for cause, right? If they think that, then they're not very entrepreneurial and they're in the wrong. But they're taking this because they see a great opportunity ahead of them. They think they can, it's almost like in sports, the WAR, wins against replacement. I will add more value than the next guy. I need to be this executive to take this company to the next steps. So in return, though, I need protections. So I want an employment agreement that says, hey, I'm going to do this. I want to be honest with the board. I want to take it in a direction. I want to be given the ability to speak my mind and take this in an aggressive direction. And in return, if I'm an at-will employee still as your CEO, but you can still terminate me anytime. But if you terminate me not for cause, you owe me severance. Maybe you owe me acceleration of equity, and also good reason. If you constructively terminate me by saying, hey, you're now moving to Alaska and you'll be the janitor, but you're still the CEO, right? So good reason. But those are the protections. But what you really want is, and then how do you incentivize the growth? And what's typical is people give either equity, whether it be restricted stock if the company's value is low enough in a startup stage, or it be stock options if it's a later stage where giving that much value in restricted stock would be a tax burden. Or you give synthetic equity, a change of control bonus where you're given a piece. It's a synthetic plan. It's not real equity, but it gives you the same upside, right?
Yeah.
So every executive comes in thinking, I'm going to have my base, my bonus based on hitting short-term targets, and then my long-term is going to be based on this equity or quasi-equity component, right? And how's the vesting? And some just time-based vesting, but a lot of them are now becoming performance-based vesting. So again, we come back to objective, measurable, attainable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe revenue's objective versus some black box formula. Measurable, hey, it's reported annually or quarterly. And attainable, let's not say we're going to grow this thing from 1 million to 1 billion, but maybe 1 million and then 3 million in a couple of years, then 10, then 20, and these different performance-based equity vests. We see the exact same thing when companies sell themselves and there's an earnout component. The earnout has to be the same ways. And by the way, when it's an earnout, we say, hey, during this earnout period, the management team from the seller also needs to retain control. Because if you're holding them to all these goals and you then terminate them or you don't let them stick to their budget and hire their team and keep functioning the way they were, then how are you holding them accountable for that lack of growth or lack of hitting those targets? So it's so synonymous. And again, it all comes back to microeconomics and incentives.
Yeah, absolutely. And, between that and compliance and everything else, Eric, I think if we wanted to, and I kind of do want to, but it kind of would blow the show up. I have a lot of questions in mind. I might end up coming and knocking on your door to do a second episode at some point. But in the meantime, if someone wants to dive deeper with you on any of these topics, whether it's the convergence between GovCon and technology and what's going on in that space, or any of those spaces that you and your firm there at Fluet.law deal with, what's the best way for people to find you and get in touch?
Absolutely. So, thanks for mentioning the website, Fluet.law. So that's FLUET.law. You can look me up, Eric Kronman spelled with a K. And John, I'll provide my email so you can put it with the notes on the podcast so people can reach me. But it's ekronman@Fluet.law. And I clearly love this stuff. I've had so many missed
see the
calls.
passion. Yeah.
I also teach at the law school level, venture capital negotiations, and so I just absolutely love helping people, talking to people. Initial calls are I worry too much, John, if I say initial calls are always free in the reach of your podcast that I'm going to have to fill that for thousands of people.
You might end up with a full calendar.
Yeah. But always happy to talk through. And so much of the time we're giving advice of just, hey, guys, I would go in this direction here. When you reach this milestone, that's when you need outside counsel. But to this point, I hope I set you in the right direction and gave you enough advice to get you going. Because it is an expense. It is expensive having, competent counsel with experience, but we just love helping companies even at the early stages. And again, we range from early stage companies to multi-billion revenue, from small deals to big deals and everything in between. And it's just so rewarding, meeting entrepreneurs, meeting businesses that are looking to transact, and helping them set up and do it the right way.
You know what? I got to tell you, just sitting here listening as we're recording, I can feel the vibe. I can feel the passion for what you do off of it. Man, I think that's fantastic. It makes you not just excited about it, but, willing and excited to dive into the details, the minutia, and to come up for air and to communicate in ways that, me sitting here not being a legal expert, I'm learning a lot more probably than you are coming from this direction. So I really appreciate you joining and everything you're sharing.
That's very kind of you to say, John. Thank you.